What's up, everyone, and welcome back to yet another episode of the Chromecast. Today we have an interview episode with Alex Kuscher, who is the Senior Director of Software Development at Google. I asked Alex for his job title, and he said that was just kind of the shortest and sweet version, but he does a ton of work and has done a ton of work on Chrome OS over the years. So we decided to do 5 questions with Alex Kuscher about 100 versions of Chrome OS. We talk about some of the early days, some of the challenges they had, and then we talk a little bit about the future. So without any further ado, here is my conversation with Alex Kuscher. Alrighty, Alex, thank you so much for taking some time to chat. This is an exciting time for us, 100 versions of Chrome OS, and we cannot be more excited to be chatting with you. We can talk through some of the early days, we can talk about the future, and everything in between. So thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for having me again. I'm super psyched to be here. It's a great 100 releases is a great time to chat a bit about the past and the future. So this is awesome.
Yeah, it was funny. In our podcast last week, we were talking a lot about what's happening with Steam, and really excited about all of that. And just the conversation evolved, and we were just getting very kind of reminiscent. You know, we were just kind of thinking back and talking about, you know, where how far we've come, and something like, you know, Steam integration and how all of that's working, and all the layers of things that are happening behind the scenes to make that possible. You know, not just a browser anymore. That's for sure.
It's true. It's still that, you know, the web is still at the core, but it's not
Yeah.
just it. So it's exciting. It's fun to see some of the early advertisement actually, where we made some pretty bold claims and sort of where we had to go back on some of them over time, which I think is the best sort of public indicator of how we have evolved. As you look back, it's kind of fun.
I love that. We might have to get some links for those.
Should do some digging. It's all out there.
Find them.
The hype.
It's probably floating around on a YouTube channel somewhere. We'll see what we can find. Yeah. So what we wanted to do today, we wanted to do 5 questions and try to put together these questions in a way that we kind of cover some of the early times and kind of work our way through some of the milestones, right, that happened, and then also chat a little bit about the future and some of your thoughts on where maybe Chromebooks are heading. And I just, you know, I remember when we first we had an interview with you. It was one of our first Google representatives that we ever kind of spokesperson that we ever chatted with, and that was, I'd have to go back and look, but that was one of our first interviews that we did for the podcast, and it's been a journey for us trying to evolve the show, and here we are again, you know, 100 versions, and this is just an exciting time. So we do appreciate you taking the time. So let's hop right into these questions. So yeah, let's go here. So what was it like in the early days working on Chrome OS, especially when no one really understood what you all were attempting to do?
That's a fun basis. There's 2 emotions that early on were sort of always with me. There was the potential of the boundless potential, right? If you start out fresh, which was the entire idea, it's like, hey, everything else has huge legacy. Let's design an operating system that actually is in the here and now and designed with the world that we were seeing, you know, not at the time, but the world that we were sort of foreseeing. So that was boundless opportunity. It was pretty exciting to sort of, we had huge, you know, sessions around what could it be, like clearly the cloud is coming, right? Connectivity is changing, right? Like the word 5G didn't exist yet, but, you know, sort of mobile connectivity was a thing, and like cellular networks, prices were coming down. So you saw all these trends, and if you extrapolated them out, you saw sort of this really exciting future, and you sort of had to ask yourself, well, what is it? Is it 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, right? Let's design for that. Boundless opportunity, super exciting. So we spent a good amount of time on that, which was maybe some of the most fun I had sort of designing a product from scratch, in particular an operating system, which is sort of, you know, the pinnacle for some of that software development. That was in an interesting way sort of counterbalanced by reality, which is many of the first decisions were all about, Yeah, that's all great and fantastic to think about. Just make it work. How about you guys work on making Wi-Fi work? Sort of
Mm,
those things. There was a lot of that early on, where there were also many um, very simple questions. And for a product manager like me, who thinks about users and their needs, often the question was not what's the best answer. The question was, shall it work? Yes or no? Right. So
mm,
like, shall the thing boot?
right.
Yes. Right. Like, shall there be an icon that tells you about Wi-Fi? Probably yes. So sort of a lot of the early ones were just making sure that we had all the basics together and assembling them.
Mm,
And that was sort of a lot of sort of, you know, just rebuilding a bunch of basics. In a way, by the way, I thought that was a really powerful combination because since we thought
mm.
about the future, we could make some decisions with the assumption that, okay, we're going to go eventually there. So let's design it in a way that it is ready to actually serve that future. Um, that's a high level sort of early days.
Yeah. What was it like? What was it like whenever you all were first making, and you know, you mentioned some of the early advertisements and stuff. Like, what was it like trying to communicate? I'm going on. I told you I was going to stick to the questions, and of course, I'm already off the questions. That's just. But like, what was it like trying to communicate it, like to consumers, to the average person that's out there thinking about buying a computer? And you said, you know, there was, you know, you all were trying to be, you know, very forward thinking in a lot of this stuff. Like, what was the messaging, and what was it like internally trying to figure out how to explain this kind of new way of computing to people?
Yeah, I mean, it's the internal external boundary there, right? Like where um, internally we were still sitting with stopwatches counting how fast the thing boots, right? We had
Yep.
very few metrics. Like it was all very much manual testing. Like I was sitting nights with multiple Chrome boxes just making sure, like, what happens if you have this device and that device next to each other? Like, do they explode? They don't explode, but sort of what happens to them. Um,
Yeah.
and then externally, you wanted to, so you were working on making things work, and externally, you're trying to explain the vision, right? And the vision was clearly about speed, simplicity, security in like a in the future where people are on the go, people are mobile, the cloud is where everything is heading, right? Um, Very much what we're seeing right now sort of very much realize itself. So we try to sort of instead of focusing on what was I think at the time traditional advertisement and traditional outreach about, hey, here's this new feature, it has a thing in it.
Sure.
Now it comes with like bells and whistles and in bling bling. It was much more about let us tell you actually about our vision, and that was a gamble a bit
Right.
like starting with the vision and then bringing the product in. So if you look at some of our really early advertisements, they were graphic, right? There was no physical device in there. It was all graphics that
Mm-hmm.
talked about like, hey, think about this. Like, the future
Mm.
is in the cloud. And here's the advantages of it, and sort of making that understandable, not so abstract, was really crucial to us, both from the marketing and from the product perspective. Right, in marketing, there was sort of one line that was fun. Is like, you could throw it in a river and like pick up another one, and then we sort of put an asterisk there. Our lawyers told us to
Yep.
not throw a Chromebook in the river, which is bad.
Right.
But the idea is like, okay, that brings home the idea that actually, like, you don't want, like, you want to have the ability to pick up another device, right? Sync is super
Right.
super useful for people. Backup, like having your stuff backed up, is really crucial. And that was still the time when everybody was like putting backups on their hard drives, and you lose the hard
Oh
drive,
yeah.
right? And then like it was a hard drive, so if you shake it too much, at some point, like the little head would break.
Yeah.
So making that vision,
USB sticks. Everybody carrying around USB sticks, and you would maybe have one in your pocket and throw it in the washer, and then you're like, oh no, there's all my classwork or
yeah,
whatever.
or worse, right? Like you leave a USB stick in a coffee shop somewhere, right? Like, these things are
Yep.
easy to lose. So making that vision of the
Mm.
future, making that sort of with examples understandable, I think was important. And I actually think,
Yeah.
to be honest, people got that. People understood sort of, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like, sort of a pretty clear message. I think
Yeah.
where it was interesting is where there's a people buy into that one, but there's also needs that you have today. and sort of making those two work together was something that we had to work on a lot, actually.
Yeah, and like from our perspective, you know, we all say, and I think we've talked about on this show before, like we're all a little bit of contrarians. Maybe we're always trying the new thing. That's just kind of the way we're all wired. And the early days of Chrome OS, especially you know for Robbie and Gabriel, was you know that fun, that excitement of tinkering and kind of learning this new operating system. But we obviously love to see the maturation of it now and see how full featured it is. But there's still even you know we were talking about the you know about Canary, and Gabe's always in Canary testing new things and trying new things with Chrome OS. But you know it that those early days of you saying you know like having all the different Chromebooks and saying oh is this gonna work on this or work on that, like that's always been an exciting kind of part of Chrome OS for us. You, I don't quote me here, but I want to say that Peter said something about wallpapers and your influence on wallpapers for Chrome OS. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's one of those great examples where I think the early think about early Chrome OS as sort of a almost a sort of a goalpost. You set it out all the way at the extreme realization of a vision, and you have to ask yourself, okay, by going to the extreme, like what have we, what is missing there? Like what do you need to adjust? And we went there, and again, the same advertisement, you gotta find it, says like, you know, it has not even a wallpaper. Well, one of my first projects was, hey Alex, you know, you should probably add a wallpaper to Chrome OS. And I was like, and I saw that ad, and I was like, well, that's gonna go on great.
Yeah.
But there was an interesting thing behind this, which is like it's a learning, right? So you put this out there, and we're
Yeah.
like, let's go for simplicity. Let's go for like you know just one window, maximize, boom, done. That's the simplest version you can imagine, right? But then you learn, and the wallpaper was a great example where we were like, the sort of the logic in you says it serves no purpose. It is a picture behind your windows. Like, what is that for? However, that completely discounts the fact that yeah, emotion and art and personalization plays a role in the way you interact with your computing devices. And we see that today with hardware as well, where hardware like the Google Homes have soft material, right? Technology becomes much more personal, much more something that like you want to interact with that feels more human. And the wallpaper was a way of that, of people to just showcase their personality in this device, right? The same reason they put stickers on the outside, the same reason we don't all drive the same colored car. It's sort of that aspect is really crucial, and that's not as logical, but it's very emotional. It's just as important. So by adding that in, it made a huge difference. Yeah, it wasn't the hardest feature in the world, right? Like you put a picture behind it, but it certainly was. It had an outsized effect. We were in a review where
Yeah.
somebody was like, "Wow, 20 years of computer science, and the wallpaper makes a big difference." And I was like, "Yeah, that's what matters. Like making things itself
Yeah.
is really crucial to humans." And then I think I want to put that in there because we worked on that one night, which is and we always ask ourselves, okay, but how can we serve that need in a different way, right? And we were like, you know what? Let's build a wallpaper app that actually pulls from the cloud. So the early wallpaper app had like all these cloud-supported wallpapers that we work with artists to get, that you could get that syncs between your devices. So you didn't have to like go
Yeah.
to google.com image search and find like, you know, blue mountain with lake in front. But we actually had a curated set, and to date we still do that, where we have sort of artists
Yeah.
coming in from different backgrounds and just providing the user out of the box with that. And I really love that sort of little story of the wallpaper app.
Yeah, it's sometimes it's the little things, right? Love it. All right, I'm gonna try to get back on track here. Let's go to our next question. All right, what was the biggest change in direction that you all had along the way to M100? And when we say M100, that's just version 100 for those listening. So M100 along the way. What was one of the biggest changes in direction that you all had?
That's a great question, because the way that we're building the operating system, right, by releasing every the time 6 weeks now 4 weeks
Mm-hmm.
is we try to make many fast small changes, more than one big change to take people with us and to sort of like gradually change it. We think that's the right way to build software. That said, there were a few big changes in there, so I can actually answer your question for real. Um, there's maybe two really big ones. One is, I think it was at the time we still called it not M but R19 and R20. That's when we built Aura, which was the new user interface. As part of that, we built the wallpaper. That was the time when we moved
Mhm.
from a full screen window manager to having multiple windows. When we introduced the
Right.
launcher, when we introduced like sort of the early concept of apps, the early concept of certain settings, where we sort of really changed all of that. That I think was a huge pivot because we were just enabling ourselves to be much more flexible because we had this, one window fills the screen, and now we had the ability to flex between screen sizes. I had one of the early Chrome
Right.
boxes on my desk, and I put it into next on a monitor. I was like, this is one window. That's a bit massive.
Right.
So having the ability to support a wider range of input output, that was really crucial. I think that was a huge pivot that today, right, like many of the decisions we made for Aura, um, are still there. And that I think that's one sort of crucial pivot that we made. The other one I think is when we started to introduce container technology to Chrome OS, and we brought the
Mm.
first Android apps over in the Play Store. When we sort of said, listen, we're actually really excited about giving people choice and giving people a multi-tiered app platform strategy where you have first-class citizens and PWAs, where you have Android apps coming in a container, um, where if you're a developer, you can bring Linux apps on, where now we're putting Steam onto it, but we're streamlining this and we're giving you a discovery mechanism that is unified across those. I think that's the other
Right.
piece where really expanding the apps ecosystem was a crucial other step. I think those two may be the biggest pivots. I'll put a little piece in there. Um, I think on the enterprise side, um, when the team brought some of the speed, simplicity, security aspects to enterprise management and was like, let's make
Right.
management really easy, right? Let's make it really easy for
Yeah.
people to set these devices up. No admin needed. So not make it only simple for the end user, but make it simple for the administrator. I think was another crucial early on pivot that, quite frankly, was really key to enabling our success in education because
Yeah.
there
Right.
wasn't making it simple for the administrator. There was no administrator in the school, right? So you made it simple for that amazing hero of a teacher who's like, I'm gonna set up 30 devices.
I think I can figure it
I
out.
think I can figure it out. Like those are heroes. So I'm like making it
Yeah.
easier for them. I think was another pivot where I think nobody has sort of had the idea of let's make enterprise software simple because you kind of get a lot of
Right.
money from service contracts and whatnot. So doing that, I think, was
Right.
equally crucial to the user interface changes I just mentioned.
Well, and that flows into our next question here because one of the other kind of pivots that we at least we saw kind of from the consumer side was around 70. So here's our kind of question here. So Chrome OS 70 was a huge pivot for the overall UI. Was that all for the slate? And what was it like internally when that device didn't quite take off?
Now I'm like Chrome OS 70. What exactly did we launch there?
Tablet, yeah, tablet mode, and yeah,
Yeah, that's a good point. So the theme of the day was yeah, Slate came out, but there was also a bunch of OEM devices that came out around the same time. And what we actually saw was people are starting to explode the form factors much more. You can
right,
actually see that Aura was partially introduced by like larger screens. There were pretty big screens and external monitors and external cooling. That sort of caused that, and then we brought it to the entire fleet. In 70, we had sort of opposite end of the spectrum, where we saw more interest in more mobile devices. Some of the like connectivity pieces came to play. Touch became much more of an input method that at the very beginning of Chrome OS wasn't on conceivable yet on laptops. So we had to ask ourselves, okay, there's new input and output modalities. We have to adjust the operating system to it. Slate was one of the like internal vehicles to make that happen. Um, there are also external ones, which actually had smaller touchscreens, which were also very interesting to play with. There was an early HP one at the time that was actually quite working well. But with every new, like in particular, input output method, those you rarely get right in the first try. So there was a
right,
little bit of an expectation. This is going to take some iteration, quite frankly. Hence the 4 weeks release cycle. um, because not only here's what I think about this: people were like, touch is when we replace the keyboard. Actually, it isn't, right? It is an additional input method you use, and that's what we sort of soon realized. There's as we have more abilities to interact with our computers, often they're complementary. Like, I want to use this device as a touch device sometimes, then I want to attach a keyboard. Sometimes I want to even have a mouse, like an extra, like I have a mouse here on my desk still, right?
Mhm.
Like that's still around. A trackpad. So understanding that the modalities become more and more multi-modality, and that a single device actually can change its character from like I'm a laptop to I'm a tablet to like I now power an external monitor. That was sort of the start of the journey with M70. We sort of put our first foot forward there, learned a lot from it, to understand how do you drive the balance between it should feel good and native and touch forward if you're more on the mobile touch mode, but then it should retreat back to sort of a more productivity focused experience and you attach a keyboard and a
Sure.
mouse, a high point precision pointing device, and like that transition should be enough to optimize, but not too much that you're jarred by it. And that is just frankly really hard. But I think over time, it took us about 20 to 30 releases to get that really right. But with stuff
Sure.
like the Lenovo Flex devices, I think it really started showing how this came together more recently. But yeah, there lots of learnings from this late times for sure.
Well, and I think it was a conversation that we had with John Miletus where he was talking about kind of lighthouse devices and a lot of the products that Google, at least at that time was putting out were lighthouse devices. So although maybe when the slate was released, there was kind of all of these things happening in the background, right? That were pushing towards touch, and then just kind of seeing that evolve over time. Because now, we have, the Duet 5, the Duet 3 here in the office, constantly trying to, figure out these new types of devices that people can go by.
You put it exactly right, and John put it right, which is um, Chrome OS in itself was built with this like lighthouse idea, right? We put an extreme out there and then we iterated from there. The Google devices are often the same way, where right, like the first Pixel book was a lighthouse. It was much more powerful than what's out there, right? Sort of to push the edge of what is capable. Slate the same way. It was a large touch device. It sort of pushed the boundaries and sort of like showed an anchor, and then we would sort of work together as an ecosystem towards that anchor. Um,
Yeah.
and you need those, and you need to make those things, and they're sometimes sort of very much out there, but that's where you push the entire ecosystem forward together.
Yeah. Yeah. There was so much that I love about the Slate. And I had the Slate over at the house and was using it over there quite a bit. That's such a beautifully designed device for one, and still like using that device. Pull it out every now and then. So okay, let's keep rolling here. Let's move on to our fourth question. Okay. So does the nature of Chrome OS and the web languages it excels at make it harder or easier to bring in new, more complex features? So basically, Chrome OS is built, on a lot of these web languages, and now as it has evolved, we're adding, new features. Is that something you all are running into as far as is that bringing in new challenges, or what are your thoughts there?
It's an interesting combination, the question of the sort of languages in Chrome OS.
Hmm.
Well, I think the nature of Chrome OS itself, as an underlying sort of at the very sort of metal place, I think actually makes it easier to bring in new experiences, right? When we built the container technology, we were like, oh, this is great. The same way we sort of, in a very rough idea, like sandboxing on the web, we can now do this for app platforms, right? So that we can bring Android in, we can bring um, Steam in, we can bring Linux in. That
Hmm.
actually made it easier because now we had this like, oh wow, like we have this tool to not be limited to one, but to provide users with the sort of choice, uh, which makes it harder for us to then have to explain it and bring it back together so that the sort of technology underneath gets hidden. But hey, that's what we're here for as an operating system. We're the
Yeah.
orchestrator trying to bring this into, bring the different musicians into one wonderful concert. So that made it easier. I think if you go one level up, um, the way I think about this, it's for us as an operating system, it's always great to have this an open source operating system. The web is open for everybody, and I think this openness, Android is open source, right? This openness helps a lot with our operating system development because we're out there, we get feedback very early on. You
Mm-hmm.
mentioned your colleague is on Canary, right? Not only
Right.
in Canary, like we have lots of people looking at our code actually, right? We have people looking at the
Mm-hmm.
web platform itself and it's asking, oh, there's this interesting new feature on the web platform that really helps with apps. Like, wonder how Chrome OS is going to implement that. So I actually think that, like, if you think about the nature of the web, of being open, of being multi-stakeholder, of being shareable, and like being sort of free, and access to
Yeah.
information is free. Um, that I think is crucial as an interplay with Chrome OS, but it's very much the same shared idea behind it, which is it's about providing you access to information fast, free, speed, simple security, and make you productive in creating such information. That sort of like really feeds off of each other. I sound a bit sort of intense maybe on that, but it actually really is exciting to me to provide that. Like that really is where the magic happens to a large degree.
100%. I think that's definitely true. And how much interconnectivity, so from a web standpoint, obviously, being as open as it is, there's a lot of different input. But just like the teams, so we had a conversation. I won't. We haven't put it out yet, so I don't want to say with who exactly. But we had a conversation. We were talking about kind of app developers and how Chrome OS is evolving there. We talked about this in our podcast last week a lot as we were talking about Steam. But, in that conversation, we were talking about, how maybe there's this team over here building this thing, and this container technology that allowed Steam to happen is also now allowing this other thing to happen. Like, what is that interconnectivity between the teams, and how are you all like collaborating to, if you're seeing someone else that's building, the containers for Android apps, how are they, you all talking with each other to then say, oh, I can maybe use that technology to do this thing that I've been thinking about. What is that collaboration like?
That's actually one of the most exciting parts, and I think you actually talked to a member of my team. So we'll keep it secret from everybody else when you talk.
Yeah, for now.
So they actually containerization is a great example of that actually, right? It's not that's not just for Steam. It's something that we looked at actually early on for the Android apps, and then the Steam piece came to it, Linux came to it,
Right.
and when we looked at the Linux aspect in particular, so the Linux developer, more sort of that angle, we started talking to some teams at Google who were like in the data center world, who actually use container technology as well. So that's actually when it gets exciting when you're like, oh wait, not only in operating systems, like, well, it's also in the servers. Sort of that sort of breadth of some of those technologies is really exciting. And in fact, that's a lot where we engage with other teams at Google, but then again, open source also outside to see
Right.
where are people pushing these things, right? And like how can maybe a technology that is really interesting at a very operating system level apply to the needs of our users. It was a pretty far jump from containerization in a data center to bringing apps to users on a Chromebook. But like when you
Sure.
talk to each other, that really shows. Same way with us and the Android team. When you have like one technology on one side, you're like, oh, actually, this could apply to more form factors. So that's pretty exciting. And then there's an external community of folks who bring our tech to unintended use cases, and then sometimes people build companies out of it, right? A good example is
Right.
Chrome OS Flex, which I'm actually pretty psyched about. Um, there are a bunch of folks who are like, hey, Chrome OS has certain abstraction layers. If we take those, we can actually run it on old computers that are out there that are like, standing in some company. They would love to have them be faster and more secure and run again and use less power, but nobody supports them. And you put Chrome OS Flex on it, turns out like that works really well. So even that sort of like people building business models around those technologies, I think is where the power of this interaction comes from. That's why I think is engagement is really important, right? Like these,
Hmm.
that's what conferences are for. The web platform does a really good job at those, right? Um, Even the big conferences, developer conferences that we have, I/O, etc., help sort of feed that.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Let's hop over to our last question here. So, looking long term, what does M200 look like? What things would you love to see Chromebooks tackle? So 100 versions from now. What does that look like?
100 versions from now, that is, I think, every 4 weeks. What is that? 8 years? So you ask me to like essentially project out 8 years in the future. You know,
Super easy,
how
right?
hard can it be?
Robbie wrote the question. We'll put it on
Yeah,
Robbie.
thanks.
It's
I'm
8 years.
gonna have to like,
Thanks, Robbie.
I'm gonna go on Twitter and like tweet at him a similar questions like, hey,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
what's gonna fuel my car in 8 years? It's a great,
What is Chrome Unbox going to be doing in 8 years?
exactly.
So we could pare it down. We
No,
could
no, no.
pare it down a little bit.
I'm
Maybe
happy to take it. Because I actually have thought this is not the first time, right? It's sort of when we do this sort of thinking about the past, uh, it
yeah,
is a logical thing. It's like, yeah, buddy, like what's the next 100 releases? And actually,
sure.
I've thought about this because it's hard to project out 100 releases in the future, but it's actually important to think about how to do it. Um,
Mm,
and I always think about sort of okay, I can predict with you sort of what next year is going to be interesting in terms of features, in terms of what we're going to build, what's coming out there, right? The further out you go, the more I have to abstract and sort of ask myself, what are trends,
mm,
and what are sort of like themes? And I actually have sort of for M200 as a team, there's one which we talked about earlier in some of the questions, which is okay, if you ask yourself, what is an operating system at the basis? It is inputs, outputs, and coordinating them, right? The user wants to input information,
mm,
they want to get it back, and we are in between being like, oh, let's make those things to work together, right? So
right.
that's the basis of it. So what's going to happen in the next 100 releases is there's going to be new modalities of input output, right? In the past 100, we have seen, trackpads, keyboards, touch, voice, stylus, right? Like more and more. There's going to be more input output methods over time. That's going to be pretty exciting. So we'll have to make sure that we build an operating system that can orchestrate them in a really meaningful way. So let's say that augmented reality glasses are like going to be replacing your screen. That's great. It's an output method, right? That my glass will be then the output, but there's still an operating system running it behind it and sort of helping you be productive, right? Or maybe it is the mouse is going to be replaced by measuring my brain waves, with my Fitbit. So I have to like write
Yeah,
all this all day. Maybe we're gonna find better ergonomics than doing this.
yeah.
But something like that. So I think that's for us just like a space to really keep watching. We've done this with
hmm
touch. We've done with the stylus, right, where we sort of bring those in. I think that's one thing. The second piece that I think in the next 100 releases is going to be crucial is sustainability. Um, which is a really fascinating thing to say for an operating system because you're like, you're a piece of software. It's like, yeah, but
hmm
like you're gonna ask yourself, we create software that runs on hardware that consumes power, right? So how do we think about power consumption? How do we think about things like when does a device go to sleep, screen brightness? Flex actually enables people to extend the life of their old machines that they otherwise have to throw away. So there's also this reuse aspect, right? And it's like recycle, reuse. I get that on my trash bins outside always. Like, first reuse, then recycle. So actually thinking about the
Right.
sustainability aspect and how we as an operating system can further that, I think is really interesting in the next 100 releases. And lots of interesting thing. Last trend, I'll be very brief, is sovereignty, which is a term we use a little bit for thinking about people are increasingly aware of their digital footprint, right? What data is
Right.
there about me? Who does it belong to? Is it mine? Where is it shared? Like, how do I identify myself? Um, those things are really crucial to grapple with and to enable people to be sort of the sovereign over their data and the sovereign over their experiences there and sort of as that evolves not only like in regulation but also in sort of just understanding of people who grow up as digital natives, right? Like all these kids growing up in schools,
Yeah.
like I didn't have a phone in school. They have phones now, right? Like they do think about their
Yeah.
digital identity. There's also a shift there, and then I want to make sure that we support that and we get that right. So those are maybe three trends. How they exactly manifest in M200,
Sure.
we'll see. But it's going to be exciting.
Well, we're very excited. We're along for the ride. We've been telling everyone about how awesome Chromebooks are for a very long time, and we're excited to see the future, and especially with the update cycle. That's something we always talk about. That's so different and so fun about Chrome OS is you're 4 weeks away from a new update, and there might be some new features, and we love it. So, hey, Alex, thanks so much for taking the time. This has been really fun. Our 5 questions probably turned into several more, but that's okay. We have 5 core questions, so we tackled those, so we could call it a success.
It was an absolute pleasure. We ran by half an hour over. That's the half an hour that I had my one-on-one with my boss, so it's perfect. I'll check now if I still have a job. This was
Well, we hope you stick around.
till next time.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate
Bye.
it. Thanks so much for catching this episode of the Chromecast. If you like this video, give us a thumbs up, go down there and hit subscribe, and make sure to click the notification bell right next to that if you'd like to be notified when we put out future videos just like this one. We appreciate you all tuning in. We'll catch you in the next one. See you.